So if you really want to understand Agile, you need to understand Waterfall. I'm not sure how many of you really worked in Waterfall projects, but I had the good or rather bad fortune of working on the Waterfall projects 20 years ago. So there was no concept of Agile then, even though there might be, but it's not really widespread. It was just taking the roots then back in 2000, I think, when it really kind of got into the as an approach. It was actually floated by some of the people in Scrum, and then that's how we actually kind of took the roots from there. So we'll talk about Waterfall and then why Agile is a better option than Waterfall. So in the Waterfall model, basically Waterfall model is nothing like, as you see, this is the design. The water, if you throw the water, it just pours from the top step all the way down to the water. So that's typically what we call as a waterfall. So in Waterfall model, it starts off with the requirements as to what is required for us to do that. And then it goes on to the design. You come up with an architecture, you do a basic high level design, a low level design, and then you actually get into the coding. You then do once the coding is done, then that's when the testing is initiated. You do the tests, and from there on, you do the deployment and the implementation, and finally you get into the maintenance of it. So if you see this, each of these is like, if you complete this one, then you get to the next one. You cannot have the water flowing back. That's the problem with the Waterfall model, simply put. So what that means is, I remember spending 3 months to write a requirement document, and the requirement document used to be so big, about 300-page document, what we call as FRS, the functional requirement specification document. And then from there on, we used to have the software requirement specification or the supplementary specification, which is the non-functional ones. And then we submit this FRS after spending 3 months to the client for review. Client would spend another month to actually go through that. After about another month of changes, updates, deletions, additions to this, finally it takes the form of a completed or approved stage, which is what I'm talking about, roughly 5 months just to get the requirements accepted and frozen, what we call as sign off in that times. So we get the client sign off. It takes 5 months to sign up the requirement, and from there on another 2 to 3 months for the architecture, then the design starts. So you're talking about roughly 9 months into the project when the actual coding will start, when the programmer would actually start the coding. And from there on, it would take roughly about 5-6 months for them to finish something. And so you're talking about roughly a year and a half, by which time the testing would be almost completed. And so that would be shared with the client for their review. So they've not seen anything till then. So you're talking about all of this for example, like in the dark room, people working in their own, like the photographers, how they used to develop the photos back in those days, the black and white photos, they used to actually dip those, and then in the solution, they used to put those. And then after some time, the photos, it gets dried. So the next day morning, perhaps, you would actually take the photos out and you can see that. It's not like the Polaroid or the kind of instant photos that we see now. So there is a bit of process involved. There's a bit of time taken involved in that dark room photo development. In the same context, what happens here is the developers, the entire development team would actually go back, sit in their own offices on the desk, and then they do the coding. So the customer is completely unaware of what's really happening. After about a roughly year and a half of giving the requirements, they actually get to see something that they thought is what they needed. But you know what? When you show that at that point of and say, this is not what we needed. This is not what we want. This is completely different. Or things would have changed meanwhile. Who has got any idea till then? Nobody. The requirements are already frozen. So we started off with development. And about a year and a half later, you go to the client and show, hey, this is your product. They say, no way. We don't want this now. This is like, and that's why no wonder there is actually a report called Standish Group report, which actually said, it did a research in terms of the IT project failures. It said that about 90% of all the IT projects done in the whole world were failures. And they actually identified the factors, and about 73% of the projects failed because of the requirements, because of the fact that the requirements are not specified, there are changes in the requirements, they're not communicated well, all that stuff. So you can actually get to see these are the definitely a lot of problems with the waterfall model. And then you look at the, as I said, it's definitely the most popular SDLC model. When I say SDLC, it's software development lifecycle. Sorry for the jargon there. It's a simple way of saying how you would develop the process that you would need to develop a piece of software. It could be a mobile application, an enterprise application, a Facebook type web application, or it could be something like a search engine offered by Google. It could be any of these. All of these are projects, software projects. So when we look at the software development lifecycle model, this was the most popular because there was no Agile, because there was no concept of Agile, there was no concept of empowering the team. You know what, most of the time, the project managers and the client would actually say, give the estimate, they actually dictate when they want things to get done. It's not the team. The team never had a say. The people, like, it's like what we were discussing the other day about the estimation, software estimation. The painter doesn't have an idea. He was not going to say how much time it takes to, you know, paint the house. It's actually told by either me, who wants the house. I would dictate how much time it would take and what are the things involved in getting the house painted, which was the worst thing to happen. And then it involves mostly linear and sequential activities. The problem with this waterfall was that it was actually mostly linear, as you would have seen here. It's involving mostly things which were like this. It's the water is falling from here. The water cannot skip this stage, right? If you put the water from here on this step, it has to go through this one, then this one, then this one, this one. It cannot jump all the way, skip everything all the way down and then jump into the last step. That's the major problem with the waterfall. So because of the fact that it's linear, you cannot change. Suddenly, if there is a change in the requirement, you can't just go back and change the design immediately and then develop. It needs to go all the way. There was a process that we used to follow. It's called CR, that is change request. The process is change request. If the client wants, for example, this particular color, which is purple now, the client doesn't like this, or perhaps that's the company which we are developing this project, the product for, has been acquired by some other company in the span of 1.5 years of this project, as we were talking about. And this company's branding is different. Now it is purple now. Perhaps the new company which has taken over has got a blue as their brand logo and brand colors. Then they want us to change this from, for example, from the purple to blue. For that small change, they need to raise a change request form, a change request, CR, and that has to go through a lot of this impact analysis, what we call as impact analysis from the team to understand what is the impact of that change in the design, in the architecture, on the UI, on the database, blah, blah, blah. And then they spend a lot of time, 1 month, to come up with the analysis of that, give a report and say a go or no go. So by the time they come up with that, it would be a good 2 months. So you're talking about making a small change, like changing the color of a particular, you know, a line or something, or even change the spelling of a word. It would take such a huge process, very, very, very cumbersome. Why? Because it's all, you know, sequential. And nobody would like to actually take that call because the customer is somebody sitting outside. They're not involved in the process. And then completion of one phase leads to the subsequent phase. That's why it's called waterfall, waterfalling, right? So unless you finish the analysis, you can't start the design. Unless you started the design, you cannot, unless you started and also completed, you cannot just start and then do the coding side by side. And then that's where it is actually the extreme programming came up, where you actually put a couple of a pair of programmers. It's called paired programming in the Agile context, where you put two programmers. One does the design and thinking and the algorithm of how to approach a problem, and the other programmer sitting next to him actually does the coding. So one person actually is thinking on the behalf of other developer, and this developer actually kind of all the way does the coding. So as and when this person does the coding, the other person was actually looking at the code. So the code is actually being reviewed in line as and when it is being done. So that's the beauty of extreme programming. That's the fantastic facilities and the opportunities offered by Agile methodologies as opposed to the waterfall. And you know that with waterfall, there are some advantages. I'm not saying it's all that bad, because you can clearly see what is involved. You have got a stepwise. You say that one after the another. It's like, what comes after 2, 3, what comes after 3, 4, what comes after 3, 4, it's 5. So you know that there is a bit of clarity in terms of the steps. So there's a predictability in terms of what we're doing, not in terms of what you're trying to see from the external factors. There's definitely change that we can't see. But then that's the reason why it's so difficult in Waterfall to accommodate the change. I was talking about changing the color of this screen from purple to blue. It takes ages. It takes so much of processing, so much of discussion, so many discussions, so many CRs, so many budget changes and approvals to just change this one. I mean, I'm not kidding. It's actually, I've worked in some projects which were so bad. So that's the problem with the Waterfall. So when we talk about Waterfall, it does give you that sense of complexity. It's too cumbersome, too many moving parts, too many things which are dependent on one another. If you move this, everything will go down. So you can't just work easily with the Waterfall. Whereas with Agile, it's all about the agility, the nimbleness, how you would accept the change, how you would prepare yourself, how you could really work quickly to accommodate and work